All right, well, welcome to the NAV XP bonus session. This is How to Grow Ministry with Less Money, and I'm back here with Dr. Joshua Whitehead, who has agreed to give us the benefit of a little bit of his experience, some of the stories and his life in ministry of how he has been able to grow ministry with less money. And the purpose of the NAV XP webinar is so that we can bring the experience and the unique gifting of the executive pastor community together in a way that's both personal and allows us to interact with one another, to continue the conversation, and that generates hope and excitement about how God is growing His church through the unique gifts and callings of executive pastors. And so, Joshua Whitehead, I'd love to give you an introduction, man. You are with Faith Promise Church, faithpromise.org, and you joined up with them as the executive pastor in, I think, 2005. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And I remember those guys were a little plateaued at the time. They hadn't experienced much growth, but since you've come in, I think worship attendance has tripled in size. And in fact, I read that Faith Promise was on Outreach Magazine's top 100 fastest growing churches 3 years in a row. So you got like a three-peat going on there.
That's awesome. Yeah. I don't know if it was in a row, but it was definitely over the period of time of the last 8 years or so.
Oh, that's fantastic. And recently you're also working with LeadNet, right? Leadership Network. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so starting in January, I took a contract position as an Innovation Lab Director working with Leadership Network out of Dallas. I'm actually focusing on two different labs, one on multi-site, and we have a multi-site jumpstart, and the second one's on interns. This year, we're going to take a real focus on internships in churches, and I think that even really ties in with the topic we're talking about today, because if churches more successfully grew leaders and started with interns and gave them chunks of ministry, I think it's just a key way to help grow as they face financial challenges that they may in the future.
Oh, well said. I know that it's a lot of churches just kind of shy away from that. And so it'll be great to have somebody with your experience and your passion for God's kingdom helping churches work through some of that stuff. Well, Josh, tell me a little bit about what you're most excited about right now.
I think one of the most exciting things right now, outside of what's happening at Leadership Network, it's just a joy. I've never been more encouraged about the kingdom and the local church as I have been in the time that I've been working with Leadership Network, because I have the chance to talk to churches across the country every day. And it's just expanded my vision for the kingdom and what God's doing, and how churches are contextualizing in their culture and really beginning to reach people in our country and around the world. It's just an amazing thing that at Faith Promise, we just had an incredible opportunity. We spent over the last 18 months, a little over 18 months, doing an expansion project. We actually added much needed children's space and a children's building, and we went the route of just expanding an existing worship center to save money. It was actually a decision that we made to have a room that maybe was less nice from the perspective of some viewing angles, but it saved us about $4 million to make that decision. And so we just decided as a ministry that we were going to go that direction, and we changed really midstream to do that, because we felt like we were better stewards of the resources that God had for the kingdom at Faith Promise. And that building was completed the last weekend of January. And so we're again in a season where God's just bringing new people into our ministry at our original campus. And it's an exciting time just to see how people are coming in, life change is happening, and a new group of people that we'll have the chance to walk with and see them grow in their relationship with Christ. So it's been an exciting time over the past several weeks.
Wow, that's phenomenal. That is really exciting. It's great to know that ministry growth is still taking place there, and you're able to reduce the cost and really do more with less. And I know that reducing budgets, lean staffing, and ministry multiplication is a hot button issue right now, and especially for executive pastors, because a lot of that decision making, a lot of the research, a lot of the number crunching really falls on us. And so it's great to know that there are healthy, growing churches out there who are guided by executive pastors that are wrestling through that, and that's part of what we want to do is gain the experience and the wisdom that God has poured into you to help you lead Faith Promise. Well, it's almost like you're reading my thoughts here, Josh, but tell me a little bit about how you've implemented or experienced personally things that may have helped your lay people find greater ownership and invest more in ministry.
Well, I think what happens, as we've talked about the subject you and I have, and I know that you have with so many others, one of the things I think we're beginning to see is that people today, even though I'm not sure they handle their personal finances much better, they want to know that nonprofits, that churches handle their finances in a way that when they're investing, that it means something and it's going to make a difference. And we've seen that come down as we've challenged our church, as we've challenged our staff, and we've challenged our staff to challenge their leaders, right? Lay people, volunteers who come every weekend. It's amazing that you would think that would repel people, right? That people would think, oh, well, we're going to get less, or we're going to experience less in our ministry. But I think what we've found is that people rallied around that to say, yeah, how do we impact more people with less resources? And how do we give them the same quality of ministry with less resources? And so we just really, as a church, one of the things that we value so much is transparency. That we say, hey, we're never going to lead through something that we don't tell the church. A lot of people would say, don't tell people that you're struggling financially and that you're not, you're having to make some cuts. We actually go the opposite way. We believe that if we tell people what's happening, that they'll respond to that. And we go the opposite. People will tell me often, well, if you tell people that, they'll think it's a sinking ship, and I'll say, well, maybe if they think it's a sinking ship, they'll bring some pails and help us bail the water, right? I mean, yeah. And so we really have a culture of transparency where when we talk to the church, when we talk to volunteers, they actually seem to respond by not saying, oh, what's going to happen, but saying, we're going to get involved at a different level and be a part of making a difference in the ministry of our church. So it's just been incredible to share, hey, this is where we are. We still need to do ministry at the same level because God's sending people. But we need to do it more effectively.
It's tremendous to have that kind of culture of transparency there. Josh, I know a lot of executive pastors who are watching this are probably wondering, have you guys always had that culture of transparency, or is it something that you developed, and was it a little bit of a rocky transition to transition into that culture, or did people just kind of accept it and appreciate it straight away?
I think there were roots of it, Tony, from the time that the church actually started 18 years ago. However, I think we made some critical decisions. Just a few months after I came on board as executive pastor, I was on staff in a different position, and I transitioned over. And one of my closest friends in ministry actually was involved in an emotional affair. And we had to make a decision in that moment. It was the biggest staff transition that our church had had up to that point. And we had to say, are we going to tell the church not what happened in an inappropriate way, but just to say, hey, this guy had a failure, and even though we're caring for him, we're loving him, he's going to be moving on into a place where we're going to care for him. We put him in a restoration process. And then he moved back out and served in ministry and has been faithful and effective. And our church, as we came to that weekend, we said, we have to either tell them, hey, this is what happened, or we have to just pretend like nothing happened. And we said, no, transparency. We've always led with transparency. Our people have always responded to that. And you know what? In all of the staff transitions that we've experienced, and this may be an anomaly, Tony, but for us it's worked, as we have led with transparency and honesty, being open, not being over, giving over information in certain situations, or if you say that, but literally what we found is that our people respond to that, and we have seen people connected to the church because they would say, wow, we can't believe you guys would lead with such honesty and integrity. And so I think that's a big deal when you're dealing with financial issues, right? We also often want to hide our issues, and our pastor says all the time, right, Satan owns what's left in the dark, but God owns what you bring into the light. And so we just always lead with that as a perspective that we say, you know what, we're not going to let the enemy own us because we're unwilling to bring something into the light. We're gonna actually tell people what's happening and ask them to be engaged and be a part of the solution.
That's phenomenal. Great advice, and a great picture of how a church has genuinely wrestled through part of their unique DNA and the benefit that that brings to the church. And I agree with you, man. I love that saying. Listen, Josh, tell me a little bit about how being on mission, particularly for you guys, has impacted your use of resources.
Well, I think that what happens when your resources get limited is that you have to you actually are forced to determine what really matters, Tony. And for churches, you know, when we have everything, and no church will ever say they have everything that they need, but in reality, many times we do have most of what we need. And then we begin to going into these want areas, and you know, we get really fat. I mean, we just begin to create ministry, and we don't really evaluate those ministries to decide, are they really accomplishing what we want? We just keep them because we can, because we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to create any issues within what's happening. But whenever you begin to see those moments where the finances aren't there and you don't have those resources available, it makes you look at what your mission is. And it makes you say, okay, what's attracting people and what's keeping people and helping them grow in their relationship with Christ? And so as we went through this process, we literally said, hey, we did a social network analysis. And for a lot of people, they may not be familiar with that, but you can Google that and you can learn a little bit more about it. It's not something that's easy to do, and but it's something that really can help you. But we looked at some core people in our church, and we said, how are they connected? What we began to find is that in our ministry, the two places where people were connected were in home small groups, and they were also connected in serving. And then most of those people's children were connected either in our children's ministry or students' ministry, and we said that's where our focus is. If we're going to connect people through this time, it's going to be by connecting them in these areas. And so we actually didn't necessarily always end other ministries. So we didn't come in and always just lop things off, but what we said is these things are our priority. The people who are connected at our church are connected in these areas. And so that really helped us to say, okay, this is what we're about. This is who we are. And these things are real values for us. And so if we can't do anything else, these are the things that we're going to do. And so our weekend worship expression's also a part of that. Obviously, I don't know that any church in the U.S. today makes it without that. But those other areas were really where we looked at as we analyzed our church. We said, these are the areas where people are connecting, and those things are going to be most important because that's where people are connected and connecting.
Absolutely. Josh, I love hearing that emphasis on focus and on mission. One of the things that I do for Oxano as a coach and lead navigator consulting with churches is going in and helping them uncover those things. And so anytime I hear about a church who is aware of what their unique identity is, where God has really given them the strength and the resources to minister, where He's already at work, man, I celebrate that. And so that's one of the things that I love about you and about Faith Promise is that you guys are dedicated to being on mission and to being focused to what God has called you to, not trying to be everything to everyone. If there were one thing that you could say to every executive pastor in the country, let's just say that every executive pastor in the country happens to be watching this webinar, right? That's what we hope for, sure.
Right.
But if you could say one thing to them, what would it be?
Well, it's such a difficult question, Tony. I'll tell you where my heart is right now, in a place where God has placed us, and I do think it's something that's so critical for the future of the church. And it's a key word that we're hearing a lot in the kingdom right now. And the word's generosity. That we're really we've moved into asking our people to be generous. And one of the things that we've shifted as a ministry that I think every church and every XP should leave their church to a shift in is this. We're actually asking our people today not what God has asked them to give, but what God's asked them to keep. I think there's a big difference in the two, and we feel like that the heart of generosity is expressed as people begin to ask God, hey, what should I keep? So that then God, do you have me to invest in the future because I want to care for my family, but then I want to invest in the kingdom. And that's such a big thing for us, that what we've realized as a ministry, and if I was an XP and I were starting over today, I have to tell you that generosity would be a huge area for me. I realized just a few weeks ago that I've been the executive pastor at Faith Promise for 8 years. If 8 years ago we had asked every person, to start giving 1% of their income. At this year, we could have every person who would agree to have done that to increase by 1% every year, giving 8% of their income by just giving 1% a year.
Wow.
And one of the goals that I have as a ministry, and I shared this with our pastor, and a little bit he thinks I'm crazy, but I'm serious, man, is I'm praying for this every day as an executive pastor. I'm praying that by 2022, every person who attends Faith Promise gives 10% of their income to fund the kingdom or beyond. They become generous and lavish in the way that they give. And as an executive pastor, sometimes I get so caught up in the details that I forget, man, there is a life change that needs to happen in people that I need to help be a part of as the pastoral role that I have as an executive pastor, that I help people move forward in their walk with the Lord. And so I really would say, man, for any guy who's starting out, for any church that's looking at the future, that people don't just give, people are taught to give. People don't just fund the kingdom, they're challenged and the Holy Spirit moves. And we're just really refocusing everything that we do to say, hey, if you just give 1% more, if you just give 1% more every year, can you imagine that? Can you imagine a day where the church is able to say, hey, 80% of our people actually are giving 10% or beyond and being generous and impacting the kingdom, not just in our ministry, but in other ministries and around the world. And 20% aren't. Every church would line up if you and I could sell that.
Right.
And I really believe it's just a simple process that we begin to challenge our people, just like we do in spiritual growth, right? A lot of times people will say, well, in giving, 10%, some people argue this, I know, but 10% is what Jesus did. Or some people say, no, I don't care whether you believe that or not. It takes resource dollars to impact the kingdom. And why not help people do that just like you help them grow in prayer, or just like you help them learn to read the Bible, or just like, we don't say, hey, if you don't read the Bible every day, don't read the Bible. But a lot of times in church we say, if you don't give 10%, don't give. You're disobedient. And we've changed that, man. We've changed it to say, you know what, we want you to get on the journey with us. It's a spiritual growth journey. And we want you to go. So that's on my heart right now. And I think if all executive pastors and staffs got behind that, in 10 years, the church would change the world. It just would happen because we would be funded to change the world.
Absolutely. It's great to hear that. I love the spiritual ambition in that, the faith you have for that, and the prayer that you put behind it. It brings to mind there's a gentleman I work with, Dr. Clint Grider, who is one of the best fundraisers in the country, and one of the things that he does with Oxano is he'll go in and we will coach a church team through actually developing a transformational discipleship program. Of which generosity is a huge part, because I'm right there with you, man. We agree 100% that giving and generosity is part of the transformational process of what it means to become a disciple and a follower of Jesus, and that when we do that, it impacts the church body in phenomenal ways. Well, also, I think David mentioned it, and I'm going to mention it again just because it's come up, but contagious generosity. Developing a culture of generosity in your church by Chris Willard and Jim Shepard is a phenomenal resource for that. Josh, what other resources would you recommend or have been helpful to you as an executive pastor when it comes to growing ministry with less money?
Well, I think that contagious generosity is a great one. We actually had Chris come on site and work with our team in developing just this process of generosity. And it changed our church, Tony. I mean, I would tell you that it changed a perspective that had been ingrained in our ministry for 16, 17 years, that God used Chris Willard, who's a great friend of ours, I know, to be a part of that process for us. And so I think that's huge. I think that every church needs to take a different perspective as you have a shrinking budget. I think that we need to quit worrying about trying to get necessarily just focus on getting people to give more. But I think the church needs to get more involved, as a lot of churches are doing now, getting people out of debt, providing financial classes, whether you use Financial Peace or Crown Financial, whatever it is. I think that those resources and regularly leading people through that only helps people, which helps the kingdom. See, I think people today have a real perspective that the church is about itself, that, hey, give your resources to us, and then we'll we'll tell you what to do and we'll dictate for you. And we don't always walk alongside and say, hey, we actually care about your personal finances. We care about you being able to actually take a vacation for rest and retreat each year. And we want to not just help you be able to give and resource in the kingdom. We want you to be able to give and resource in your life and your marriage be better because your finances are better.
That's a phenomenally powerful statement, Josh. Thanks for sharing, man. I appreciate your time. Hey, is there anything that you'd like to say before we wrap it up?
No, Tony, I'm just so excited about this. I think that God has given you a vision for something that executive pastors don't have. There's tons of resources for senior pastors. There's tons of connecting points for children's pastors and worship leaders and pastors and all these different things. But executive pastors, I think, are alienated from each other. And so I really pray that people get behind what you're doing so that we just see a major shift in guys who are executive pastors. And I really pray that not only is it something that makes us better administrators and leaders and operational leaders, but I really pray that it also makes us better pastors, that we embrace that pastoral part of our role as well and are a part of the spiritual formations process. And so I'm excited for you, man. You have such incredible kingdom wisdom, and I would just encourage guys to be a part and ladies to be a part of this NavXP series. Is going to be awesome. It's going to be an incredible year and what God's led you to.
Well, phenomenal. Thanks so much, Josh. And that just reiterates, the real value in this is when we were able to come together, because I think one of the largest resources for the executive pastor community is executive pastors. There's a tremendous amount of experience and wisdom from mistakes, from learning, from standing on the shoulders of others that are available. And so more than watching this, what I would really appreciate and what I think will be the most benefit to God's kingdom is participation. And so I want to invite everybody who's watching to participate, to let your voice be heard in this. You can join the NavXP Google Plus community. You can also tweet with the hashtag NavXP, and I'll get that. And I want to invite you to continue the conversation with Josh at joshuawhitehead.net. This will be on his blog, and you can always find a lot of wisdom and insight from there. You can also come to my blog and find this, tonybowick.com. And we're so excited you were here. It was great to have you, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you. May God bless your ministry and continue to do amazing things through the role of the executive pastor.